I support women having a choice of doing whatever they want to do. I want to be able to do whatever. I don't want to be stuffed in a box. I love who I am.
Oh, go ahead.
I just want to hear somebody after that.
Oh, okay. Yes, sir, you in the back there.
And I think that's what it is, because like, as someone who's a gay man, like it's always been, it's okay if you're a feminist, as long as it doesn't turn out that you are gay. That's been the problem with hyper-masculinity, or what should be called patriarchy. Like, it's always been an issue, but it's never talked about. Now, as someone who's an academic, like, it's never talked about, and it's always just dismissed as, oh, like, it's hard to be feminine, but what happens when that femininity does meet up with me being gay, or just me being just like feminine being accepted, like being accepted? It's both by women or men. That's never talked about.
I think this notion of inherently feminine or masculine traits is really problematic. You know, I mean, I know what people mean when they talk about the feminine side of themselves and the masculine side of themselves. I mean, you were saying that there's an extraordinary amount. I think we are mostly similar, and I think there's such an incredibly broad spectrum of behaviours, and so I just kind of hesitate to use those particular labels. You know, even talking about the softer or harder sides of ourselves is sort of difficult too. I think if we can just acknowledge that there's such a broad spectrum and that people as individuals will exhibit a great range of some behaviours and other behaviours or feelings not at all. Certainly in terms of the whole idea of women as the nurturing group, you know, I do think we have to be careful of that one, because you know, that rules out men as being the super nurturers too. I mean, it's automatic, I guess, to look for commonalities. Lots of women are like this. Lots of men are like this. But I do think there's something inherently problematic about the nature of using feminine and masculine as labels, really.
Well, and I think those gender roles are reinforced in advertising and other capitalist ventures to tell us how to think and who to be, who we are. So we'll buy certain things and move forward in that particular kind of sphere.
Well, yeah, we're living it, because we're in a country right now where the LGBTQ community is fighting for equality. And they're not saying, no one is saying that someone wants something exclusive that someone else doesn't have. They want to have what the person that already has it exclusively, apparently, which is the heterosexual world, and that's marriage. Because it's, again, there's a signal out there that says, oh, well, if you're a male and you're a man and you're a woman, you have to conduct yourself in this way, and the construct of your family is subject to my approval. But the 800-pound gorilla that we have in the room is religion. Because religion is telling people, you can't do this because we say that you are a sinner and you're going to go to hell. And half the country believes some of those things. So we also have to acknowledge that behind all of the talk are also religious effects in our society that cause us to have certain social mores to say, whether we want to believe it or not now, and even though we're compelled to say, this is how I want to form my family, there's this thing back here that's talking, you know, and I think that part of the resistance that we see in our country right now toward being progressive about these things is rooted in religion saying you don't get to do that. And we're a secular nation with religious freedom, so.
I wanted to go back to the comment another woman mentioned earlier about being disappointed in where we have, you know, how far we haven't come. And in the 70s, when I went for a job interview, I was asked, was I using birth control because they didn't want me to be pregnant. They don't ask the men if they're planning to get someone pregnant or anything. But we don't have the autonomy over our own bodies. When women don't have the choice to decide whether she's going to carry a baby, be pregnant. When a woman doesn't have the choice in a lot of communities to breastfeed that child in public, it's like when we have people telling women how to handle their own bodies, that is really just so wrong. I mean, men are not told what they can and can't do with their bodies. And so I think that we really need to get that just basic right to have decisions over our own bodies.
You mentioned there in the job interview that you had to do, those kinds of things are happening today. And you can see with the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known by some as Obamacare, that there was a huge controversy over the bill's provision to have access to birth control, so much to the point that when women like Sandra Fluke from Georgetown stepped up to defend that right, she was called a slut by folks like Rush Limbaugh and other supposed authorities. So those kinds of ugly mores rear their heads all the time. We had a person in the back. Someone raising their hand. This person again. Okay.
So going back to the religious nature of things is how it's ingrained inside the LGBT community. You talk about marriage, but also you didn't talk about how colonization also affects the way that we talk about the LGBT movement, especially for people of color, or how it affects trans individuals. How would you talk about that in regards to feminism? Or historically, people of color and trans individuals have been neglected or outright been pushed out. How would you address that?
I have some ideas on that. I think that looking at, feminism can, not everybody does, but I don't think there's anything about that feminist theory that excludes those conversations. Looking at those from an intersectional perspective. Today I teach, when in my gender studies class, we talk about trans and gender queer issues. I think that's one of the most important discussions in gender studies today. And I'll be doing a conference next week if you want to go to that. And looking at actually challenging trans and genderqueer invisibility in academia. It's there, but what's frustrating to me is it's marginalized in gender studies classes and then for 2 weeks in gender studies. These issues should be, along with other feminist issues, it is a feminist issue. All of these are feminist issues, and they need to be discussed outside of just gender studies classes. They need to be in a range of different classes. So I think it's there, it's just marginalized. That's how I see it. There are some people doing really, really good work around it, but
I would also argue that it doesn't just need to be in the classroom, that feminism, as someone who is academic, I fear to talk about feminism because it's so academic, that you can only access it if you are in academia, but what happens if you're inside the community and you do not have access to academia? What do you do then?
Ooh. Did you have these conversations around which specific ones? Sorry, tell me again which. So any of these conversations, how do you approach it without using the word or without using feminist theory or?
How do you address it without being academic in your language? Because so many of my peers don't have access to it.
And that's something actually, God, to be honest, this is something we have to talk about all the time. I don't have a perfect answer for that.
What about talking about representation? Where are women represented in politics? Where are women on the wage scale? Where are women in terms of justice with opportunities? Where you don't see them, the whole misrepresentation film, right? There wasn't much academic about that to me.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to think of non-academic return. Yeah, let's talk after you in the back. I want to talk to you. I can't see you, but I really want to talk to you.
Sir, you can wait patiently. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm curious as to what the panel or anyone else may think some of the reasons are for what appears to be sliding backwards from the days of Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan. Is it because in between then and now, women perhaps thought that issue was already handled and we took our eye off the ball? Because today you could argue it's worse than ever. You've got dusty old white men that want to control women's bodies and turn back the clock on Roe v. Wade and the new phenomena of slut shaming. You could argue that it's worse than ever. And as part of it, you let the people with the loudest voices do the defining. Sahara, you mentioned that there was a negative impression of the term feminist.
Right.
So the people with the loudest voices it seems, get to define, whether it's feminist or liberal or community organizer or any of those things that now have a negative connotation. And do feminists need to have a louder voice again to counter the loud voices of these people that want to take us backwards? Someone in between Gloria Steinem and Emma Watson. or why do you think it's slipped backwards? Or maybe you disagree that it hasn't slipped backwards?
No, I totally agree. I think it's, I think part of it is the illusion that we've arrived at equality. And I do think part of it is you do have outspoken voices, but you have it on both sides. I think we get a lot of our information about feminism from celebrities, as I mentioned earlier, and it's not all positive. I don't think there's a unified voice of what feminism is or what it stands for. So you get the really loud people that think that it's the man-hating, bra-burning, evil feminists, So I think that's where a lot of the problem comes from. I think it's lack of cohesive information. And again, the illusion that we've arrived at gender equality. I mean, you're a kid and you hear about slavery and you're like, that's bad. Good thing we live in today's world, So you think you're past that. You think we've already arrived.
I think it's also part of this generally conservative community, generally conservative time. I think in some ways things are better. We can look at a whole lot of things that have been achieved, but I certainly am quite appalled by the sort of backlash against it. And I, like lots of people of the middle age, would have thought that things would have come further. Indeed, they have. But I don't have a lot of theories.
No, again, we are a secular nation with religious freedom, not religious supremacy. And I think that one of the things that we're seeing, because if you want to talk about Hobby Lobby, you want to talk about even the LGBTQ fight, everything that has anything to do with anything these days, you hear the subtext back in there that it's being inspired by religion saying that you cannot do these things, that you are not allowed to do that, they don't approve of that. So therefore, rather than having a live and let live atmosphere in our country, we have to have a total winnership. Look at what happened on Tuesday. It's the same. It's in the win column, but it doesn't necessarily have any substance beneath it. And words like feminism have a negative connotation. Words like being a liberal means that, hey, you're weird. But common sense needs to be conflated in there somewhere. And we have to get past that. No, I don't care what anyone's religion is. I don't care how they practice it. I don't care what they do. But there was a line in Proposition 8 movie where there was a woman who was in a street protest, and I think it was in San Francisco or maybe even LA, I don't know. But she said, you know what? You can have your religion, just don't bring it into my city hall. And that's the reason that we don't have a specified religion in this country, because we would be nothing but perpetual fighting in the streets, because every religion has to be superior over the next one. And I realize that that's just my opinion, but I really believe that that's part of the underlying problem that we have right now, that religion has creeped too much into the secular day-to-day lives that we're living, and you don't get to just do it on Sundays anymore. You got to have it all the time. It's just my opinion.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why feminism hasn't taken stronger root is that we do think of it as academic often, and we also think of it as white women, like play is very representative of that, and women of privilege too. And that feminism will do better when feminism broadens its scope, which it does, but I think we don't always talk about it when it's more about ending poverty, because that disproportionately affects women, and when it's more about working for racial justice, because there's so many women impacted by racism. And so I think that's one reason why it hasn't gone further, and I think that I don't know how to change that, but Beyonce, well, maybe that's a little bit of hope, right? But I think that's my thought.
And I think we're more afraid of taking on a more extreme version of feminism. There's lots of different layers of it. Like there's liberal feminism where it's like we want to work for men's and women's equality. Like yes, everybody can do this. But then there's radical feminism where you want to break down the social structures and say maybe these are wrong to begin with. And I think the second wave feminism, I think that period of time has been broken down to stereotypes and not always painted in a positive light. And so I think people are actually really afraid to approach a more radical version of feminism at this moment, which I think might actually be what's helpful, you know? But instead what we have is celebrities and my timid kitten approach, you know?
Well, it's because radical feminism equals, in a lot of people's minds, it equals man-hating feminism.
Yes.
I mean, radical doesn't usually mean breaking down those particular structures. It has very specific connotations.
Great. Go ahead.
That brings up what I was going to say, and I think the word that I want to start with is just really muddy. I feel like my viewpoints and all of this is really muddy. I was in a relationship with a man where I played the male role of supporting him while he was in school, and then I was in a relationship with a woman where I played the male role by smoking weed on the couch while she made dinner. And so, regardless, I'm mad. And so muddy. But I think that I'm 34 now, and I think there's something in this generation where I had a mother that was like, we can do it twice as good. I was that, whatever that movie was, you know, I can do it better than you can. And my dad was a race car championship, so my mom quit doing the horse thing to be a race car champion, and then was like, see, I can do it too. And so I was raised with that sort of influence where it was women. I mean, my mom to this day would like this scene where there's that manipulation over the man. It was like, please go have my husband smoke pot so I can figure out what his next roles in life should be. And that really strong feminine thing that led me into not a disrespect for men. And so in my 20s, I just thought, oh, as long as I don't have to end up with one of those, I think I'll be okay. And to now find role models that are men and realize that there's also that kind of ebb and flow. And sure, my mom got the Mormon thing packed in on top of it and stuff, so she was very rebellious. But there's an interesting thing with my generation now where when I get out lip gloss, it goes around a circle and it's not based on gender. I'm just gonna put it on. So,
Interesting. Any thoughts on that? Any thoughts on the journey that she specifically made? Moving from playing what she called male roles and two different kinds of relationships.
I think it goes back to language. It's interesting because you say male roles, but you're a woman, you know? So I think it goes back to the gender dichotomy thing where it's not necessarily healthy that it is broken down into you either have to be male or female, you know? Or you play those roles.
Great. Sir, go ahead.
Okay, well, as long as we're talking about language, it seems to get in the way of a lot from the reading children's books, and I know there are a lot of male characters that when I read the Sahara, they became she's.
It's my dad.
And also, I've run into the problem of being accused of being a feminist many times and going, no, it's more about equality, because I know that when somebody says, do you have green eyes, it's easy to say yes, and they know what I mean. But the problem with saying I'm a feminist is that people are going to translate that into whatever mode they have, how they translate that. So I'm putting it to this very distinguished panel to give us some new language, give us some way to identify and not scare people off.
I think we need to hang on to the word and defend it and break down those stereotypes. I wouldn't give it up. I mean, I think it's important. It needs to be more inclusive, as the person in the back row who's not here anymore, maybe, pointed out, or we need to talk about it in a more inclusive way. But I would not give that up or name it something else, because I think that I mean, feminism for me is about social, economic, and political equality. I mean, today, the weird thing, this is totally separate, but I have to say it. The thing about feminism today is that I don't think that that's as clear. It's about social, political, and economic equality. What I feel like might be being sold to younger women, I don't know, is that it's about like consuming the right thing or being attractive, or I'm not even sure. Like on BuzzFeed, there was this like, are you a bad feminist quiz? And it was like, what music do you listen to? I'm like, what the hell does this have to do?
You're a bad feminist if you listen to Taylor Swift or
social, equality. Like this is about equality, and don't just, it can be a distraction, right? It can be, I think, distract. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm not supposed to be calling people, right?
I want to hang on to that word. I think it's incredibly useful, and I think when people start to use it and just are unapologetic, and actually have it as a social construct, not just as a particular identity framer, but actually talk about it from all those different points of view and are unapologetic in their use of it. Then it becomes more widespread. It becomes a little bit less scary.
We are at about 4:55, so I'm going to let this gentleman ask his question, and we can have some.
And there was a gentleman up the back too.
Yeah, gentleman up the back. So let's just do 2 more questions. We'll start with the gentleman at the mic. And who's the person who had the other question? Okay, we'll go from here to here, and then we'll wrap up. So, sir, go ahead.
Well, it's just a commentary. It seems to me it's interesting and telling that there is a need to have a term and a movement called feminism. Nobody talks about being a masculinist, or what would you think of me if I said I was? And we also don't talk about being an abolitionist anymore. We don't talk about that, but once upon a time that was really important, I suppose. Or I'm sure it was.
So hold on, I'm processing. I'm not the quickest processor, but there, hold on. Okay. Does someone else want to take it first?
Women started out as chattel.
Yes.
Basically. And
they did.
And I suppose that one of the greatest things, and this isn't my quote, I wish it was, I'm paraphrasing, but one of the greatest tools of the oppressor is to realize that they have an in the oppressed mind, that the oppressed mind is going to buy what the oppressor is saying. So in other words, you're born into this situation, and that's your lot in life, and that's where you're going to go. That's not equality. And men, somebody, I guess, what came first, the chicken or the egg in this case? I don't know, neither one is whatever, but man came first in this gig. And women have had to find ways to get in there and start talking about stuff. I'll give you an example. In 1976, when the EEOC laws changed, I was a rebellious 20-year-old. And I didn't know what to do. I had 2 years of college under my belt. And I thought, well, I have to work because I have to support myself. And what did I do? I went to the phone company. Went to the phone company, sat down, had absolutely no idea what I was applying for. But guess what they did? They said, you look like somebody who could climb a telephone pole, and we want women in non-traditional jobs. So I went to work as a line person, as a telephone installer. And you want to talk about, taking on a masculine role. Nikki, where'd you go? You want to, you take on a masculine role. That is a man's job. Climbing a telephone pole that's, this wide, and you've got hooks on your legs, and you weigh 110 pounds, and you're going up to the top. Then you find out what it is like, really, in those roles. And you're right, there's a ton of pressure for that. But women have had to strike their ways, because how long can you be barefoot, pregnant, silent, bound, gag, and sit down and be quiet forever? You just can't. It just can't happen. But you guys had it all. So did that help you?
Yeah, I know. I was thinking so many things at once. It's hard. Sometimes I get on overload.
Me too. Can you tell?
There's a long way to go. What is Congress, like 20%? Are we even at 20% women? There's still a wage gap. There's still a lot of social inequality, the slut shaming, and other things that are brought up. So looking at feminism-wise, they're not an equivalent. There is a men's rights group that scares the shit out of me. But there are also men talking about masculinity and critical masculinity studies in a productive way. I'm thinking of like Kimmel and Mesner and other people that are talking about like how does patriarchy also put pressure on men, and there's language around this hegemonic masculinity because there's an ideal masculinity, and if you don't live up to it, you're going to be judged by that ideal that really no one lives up to. So I think there's ways to talk about it, but to argue that like men are oppressed or don't have as much social, political, or economic equality just doesn't make sense to me at all. But
it was law that men could beat their wife, but the rod it had to be a certain size. That is not a very long time ago that law was.
Yeah, and marital rape laws are pretty new too.
Our last question at the top there.
Oh, it's not a question.
Okay,
I
comment.
love the idea of embracing the word feminism. but I also like the idea to make it less scary for some people that it's okay for men to stand up and say, fuck yeah, I'm a feminist, and not be ashamed of it, and say, gay or straight, yeah, I'm a fucking feminist. We're all in this together. You know, if I come to work with a bag, people have to put it in a box, like, oh, is this your man first? It's my fucking bag. Fuck
Will you print those t-shirts and get them to us right away?
That was a wonderful comment to end this discussion.